Good morning. Thank you for joining Mayor Brown's Global Financial Markets Teleconference Series. Today's call is entitled The Biden Infrastructure Plan, Prospects and Opportunities. First, a couple of housekeeping items. As regular listeners will know, this call is being recorded. We will be emailing an audio link to all participants should you wish to listen to the teleconference again or forward it to your colleagues. In addition, the recording will also be available as a podcast on your preferred podcast platform. Since we will not have a Q&A session, please send your questions regarding today's topic by email to gfm@mayorbrown.com and we will respond promptly. This is the same email address on your invitation email. Joining us today is Mayor Brown partner Andrew Olmem and Mayor Brown partner Jonathan Becker. Andrew Olmem is a partner in our Washington, D.C. office and a member of the Public Policy, Regulatory, and Political Law practice. Prior to joining Mayor Brown, he served as the Deputy Assistant to the President for Economic Policy and Deputy Director of the U.S. National Economic Council, where he oversaw the development and coordination of all domestic economic policies, including for financial services and infrastructure. Jonathan Becker is also a partner in Mayor Brown's Washington, D.C. office and a member of the Public Policy, Regulatory, and Political Law practice. Prior to joining Mayor Brown, Jonathan was a partner at another prominent international law firm, and before that worked in all three branches of the federal government, including positions in the White House, the Department of Justice Antitrust Division, and the U.S. Senate, where he was Chief of Staff to Senator Amy Klobuchar. With that brief introduction, we will now begin today's discussion. Andrew, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Today, we are going to provide an overview of President Biden's recently announced infrastructure proposal, the American Jobs Plan, and briefly discuss how it is likely to move through Congress. We're going to focus most of our discussion, though, on the wide range of policy priorities and the unprecedented amounts of funding contained in the bill. Our goal today is to help you understand if the bill will impact your business or create opportunities or difficulties going forward. To begin, on March 31st, President Biden announced the release of his $1.9 trillion infrastructure proposal, the American Jobs Plan. If enacted, the proposal's price tag of $1.9 trillion would make it not only the largest infrastructure bill ever enacted, but it would be on course to be one of the largest bills ever enacted in U.S. history, on par with the CARES Act enacted last year and the American Rescue Plan enacted earlier this year. To give some perspective, only 8 countries in the world have GDPs above $2 trillion. The proposal is on par with the entire GDP of Canada. So you can see the amount of funding proposed by the Biden administration is really staggering and unprecedented. And further, the proposal covers not only traditional infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, ports, but also a wide range of other policy areas, including telecommunications, environment, education, and healthcare, just to name a few. The proposal, which right now is only a 30-page Word document, will be now taken up by Congress, which will incorporate the proposal into around 1,000-plus page bill with the specific programmatic details and requirements. It is expected that congressional Democrats will move the proposal using reconciliation procedures, which allow certain tax and spending bills to be considered with expedited procedures, including without being subject to filibusters in the Senate. For the sake of time, I'll skip over going into details of reconciliation, but it is important to note that it is a more complex process that creates pitfalls and opportunities for Democratic members to seek to advance their policy priorities by holding up the bill. Because Democrats have very narrow majorities in both chambers and Republicans have already signaled that they will not support the bill, Democratic members of Congress, especially senators, have significant leverage to negotiate their own policy priorities. As a result, Congress could not only make programmatic detailed reforms as part of the legislation, but Congress could also significantly alter the scope and size of the final legislation. Indeed, it's possible that with such narrow majorities, Democrats are unable to coalesce around a bill and ultimately nothing gets done. However, in our view, passing an infrastructure package is such a key priority for the Biden administration and to most Democratic members. We believe it's far more likely that a significant bill is ultimately passed. It's also important to note that it is possible, indeed likely, that there will be actually a second bill related to infrastructure that would be passed if the reconciliation procedures are used, because as I noted, reconciliation is only permitted for certain tax and spending provisions and doesn't allow the inclusion of provisions related to changes to existing programs. So it's very likely we'll see a bill that would reauthorize the Highway Trust Fund, move through regular order, and move separately as well. But now that we've gone through that legislative process and set the framework, let's move into the proposal and go over it in detail. Jonathan is going to begin with going over the traditional infrastructure programs contained in the proposal. Jonathan?
Thanks, Andrew. The proposal calls for $150 billion to modernize bridges, highways, roads, and streets. The Biden proposal aims not just to fix roads, but to fix them right by incorporating safety and resilience into the construction. Indeed, the proposal would dedicate $20 billion to enhance existing road safety programs and new programs to fund state Vision Zero plans to reduce accidents, especially with cyclists and pedestrians. The proposal also calls for a dramatic increase in funding for public transit programs by allocating $85 billion to modernize and expand existing transit systems. The goal here is to extend bus, rapid transit, and rail service to more communities across the country. Similarly, the proposal requests $80 billion to make repairs for Amtrak and to modernize the Northeast Corridor, as well as to connect new cities to rail service and enhance grant and loan programs for passenger and freight rail safety, efficiency, and electrification. The Department of Transportation's Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act and its Railroad Rehabilitation and Improvement Financing programs are likely to see significant increases in their funding authorizations.
So the Biden proposal also contains a major effort to electrify the U.S. automobile fleet. It proposes more than $174 billion to fund the transition through point-of-sale rebates and tax incentives for Made in American EVs, electric vehicles. Unlike the current EV tax credit, which largely goes to higher-income Americans, the proposal pledges to ensure that EVs are affordable for all Americans. In addition, the proposal seeks to build a national EV charging station network of some 500,000 chargers by 2030 by establishing a grant program for states and local governments and the private sector. The proposal would replace 50,000 diesel transit vehicles and electrify school buses through a Clean Buses for Kids program at the EPA.
The Biden plan also calls for $25 billion to modernize U.S. airports and $17 billion to modernize waterways, ports, and ferries. The proposal also includes funding to reduce air pollution arising from ports. And to update the country's aging electric grid, the plan proposes to spend $100 billion to do this. This is, according to the administration, a big job creator, as the $100 billion would put hundreds of thousands of people to work laying thousands of miles of transmission lines. The $100 billion is to be spent modernizing and updating the grid so that it will produce 100% carbon-free electricity by 2035. Of course, building transmission lines is easier said than done, and power companies' efforts to build long-range transmission lines have failed in recent years as they've gotten stuck in protracted political and legal fights from local governments and individuals who hate seeing transmission lines in their communities. But even more than siting and permitting issues, the biggest obstacle to large-scale transmission modernization has always been funding. To help alleviate these funding challenges, the Biden administration would establish a new Grid Deployment Authority to be housed in the Department of Energy that would, among other things, find creative financing tools to spur additional high-priority, high-voltage transmission lines. In fact, the president promoted a tax credit for transmission projects, something that would be of tremendous appeal to developers. And after the president rolled out his plan, Senator Martin Heinrich reintroduced a bill that would offer an investment tax credit for long transmission lines, and we can expect that legislation to be rolled into the bill that Congress ultimately drafts. In addition to updating the grid, the president's plan calls for around $111 billion to clean up drinking water systems. Breaking down that $111 billion, the plan would allocate $45 billion for grants to water utilities to help replace lead water lines. In fact, the administration believes this level of funding, $45 billion, would pay for the replacement of all lead water lines nationwide. Another $56 billion was proposed for water and sewer projects, and $10 billion to clean up PFAS, the so-called forever chemical found mostly on military bases, in airports, and other sites that have used firefighting home. This $110 billion will be a boon to water sensing and filtration and other water startups that have emerged in recent years. There are also several unique funding streams contained in the proposal. The proposal allocates $20 billion to address historical inequities in infrastructure and transportation programs.
For, quote, ambitious projects of regional and national significance that are too complex or large for existing funding streams, the proposal sets aside $25 billion. What types of projects could qualify for this funding is unclear, but it's likely that enterprising states could seek to use it for projects that cross multiple state lines, such as certain bridges and highway systems, or serve multiple jurisdictions, such as airports.
It's important to note that the proposal explains at length the importance of having new infrastructure be built to prevent, reduce, and withstand climate change. The proposal appears flexible about what falls into this bucket, so it probably creates a lot of opportunities for innovations in building materials, home efficiency products, flood and erosion control measures, and other such devices. Let's now turn to other areas of the bill, which consists of other forms of infrastructure.
The proposal includes $213 billion for housing-related programs. The administration is seeking to produce, preserve, and retrofit 2 million affordable and sustainable homes. There is $40 billion for public housing-related projects and $20 billion for the Neighborhood Homes Investment Tax Act tax credit to build and rehabilitate 500,000 homes for low and middle-income families.
One of the largest components of the bill, and something that Congress has been trying to address for a number of years, is to upgrade and to expand broadband across the country. And this is what the Biden plan will do. According to the White House, around 30 million Americans lack access to high-speed broadband, and many more find broadband too expensive for their families. For this reason, Biden's infrastructure plan will commit $100 billion, or roughly 5% of the total cost of the plan, to ensure that Americans in rural areas connect to broadband, and also to make broadband less expensive to ensure low-income people can access it. Like everything else in the infrastructure plan, the details on the broadband component are a bit hazy, but two of the plan's components have already met with criticism. First, on the question of who can receive these funds, the president's plan places a priority on government and nonprofit networks. Progressives have long pushed to do just that. That is, direct federal dollars to municipalities, public utilities, and electric cooperatives to build their own broadband networks. And that makes sense. Public-owned networks can offer cheaper broadband and ensure that more people are reached. But municipalities and local governments have mixed track records of success when it comes to public-owned networks. Broadband networks are difficult to manage and costly to maintain. And industry is already pushing back on this Biden proposal and urging the government to not put a thumb on the scale in favor of publicly owned networks. And second, on the question of what type of broadband the legislation will promote, the administration's plan prioritizes quote-unquote future-proof technologies. That's been interpreted to reference investments in fiber-to-the-home technology, which can be faster than cable or even wireless broadband. And as we learned during the pandemic, we all now need high-speed networks to function, and fiber to the home can offer the fastest download speeds. But it's hard to get fiber to every home in America, and industry has already pushed back on this component of the broadband plan. They're pushing for a more industry-agnostic approach to broadband, and one that could include cable, wireless, 5G, and the like. In sum, the $100 billion for Broadband is among the least controversial of components of Biden's plan, but the devil is always in the details, and questions about who receives the funds, government or private industry, and which type of broadband technology to prioritize, if any, are fights that Congress will undoubtedly address in the weeks ahead.
Now, there are several major provisions that fall outside even a broad definition of infrastructure and fall more into the category of investment or long-term human capital support. For example, the proposal calls for $180 billion for R&D investment. This funding includes $50 billion for the National Science Foundation to enhance research on semiconductors, advanced energy technology, biotech, advanced computing, including artificial intelligence, and advanced communications technology. It includes $30 billion for R&D focused on innovation and job creation, especially in rural areas, $40 billion for upgrading research facilities and laboratories located across the federal R&D agencies, such as the Department of Energy, with half of the funding going to historically Black colleges and universities and other minority-serving institutions, including a national climate change lab affiliated with a HBCU. The proposal also calls for creating up to 200 centers of excellence that serve as research incubators at HBCUs and other MSIs to provide graduate fellowships and other opportunities for underserved populations. There's also $35 billion for climate change research and clean energy technology, including carbon storage, carbon capture, electric vehicles, advanced nuclear, and rare earths.
The infrastructure plan also incorporates other priorities of the Biden administration and even before that, the Trump administration. One of those things is securing U.S. supply chains in critical technologies and materials and promoting U.S. manufacturing in critical goods. Biden's plan includes $300 billion to support U.S. manufacturing, strengthen supply chains, and increase access to capital for domestic manufacturers, including, among other things, $50 billion in semiconductor manufacturing and research, as called for in the CHIPS for America Act. This is a priority for Majority Leader Schumer and others in Congress, especially in light of the semiconductor shortage, which has impacted the U.S. auto industry. The bill also includes $50 billion to create a new office at the Commerce Department dedicated to monitoring domestic industrial capacity and funding investments to support the production of critical goods. It includes $52 billion in capital access for domestic manufacturers, including an extension of the 48C manufacturing tax credit program and the creation of a new financing program to support debt and equity investments for manufacturing. The plan has $30 billion over 4 years for major new investments in medical manufacturing, research and development, biopreparedness and biosecurity, and $14 billion for the National Institute of Standards and Technology to combine industry, academia, government to advance technologies critical to future competitiveness, and $31 billion to create a national network of small business incubators and innovation hubs, which will provide small businesses in underserved communities access to credit, venture capital, and R&D funding. The President's plan also includes more than $25 billion to upgrade and construct child care facilities across the country. In particular, the plan would create an entity called the Child Care Growth Innovation Fund, which would provide money to states to upgrade child care centers and facilities and build new ones in underserved areas. The plan would also create a tax credit designed to encourage businesses to construct child care facilities in their workplaces. The tax credit would cover 50% of the first $1 million of construction costs per facility. Notably, and to the disappointment of many child care advocates, the Biden proposal did not include plans to increase wages and benefits of child care workers, something then candidate Biden campaigned on while running for president. Those efforts could end up in the next infrastructure plan, which, as Andrew said at the outset, the administration may outline in the next few weeks.
And lastly, we will end with what is the single largest line item in the proposal, the $400 billion for home care workers. These funds will go towards home and community-based care for aging relatives and with people with disabilities. The details on how these funds would be spent are still unclear, but it looks like it would involve an expansion of Medicaid to cover more home and community-based services and extend the money follows the person program. Certainly, this proposal, if enacted, could have a dramatic impact on the structure of the long-term care market.
So in conclusion, and as you've just heard, this proposal is expansive. It extends well beyond traditional infrastructure. It's ambitious, and it will be transformative for the numerous industries that stand to benefit. That's why advocates have already descended on Congress to help shape this legislation as it moves forward in the weeks and months ahead. As Andrew mentioned at the start, the Biden plan is only 30 pages. It is a true plan, and it's now up to Congress to engage in the sausage making and turn that plan into legislation. And Mayor Brown, we're following these developments closely. To the extent you have questions or interest in engaging, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Jonathan and Andrew, and to our audience for tuning in. A few brief reminders. You will receive an email with a link to the recording of today's call, and the recording will also be available as a podcast on your preferred podcast platform. Lastly, as mentioned before, if you have any questions related to today's content, please email them to gfm@mayorbrown.com. Thank you again for your participation. You may all now disconnect.